My dad does cook, but you know, no mom always. Whenever my dad cooks, he cooks.
Welcome everybody in the Zoom. Sorry I'm a little bit late. Let's go ahead and get us started and ready to go. Give you a little less than 3 minutes, about 2 minutes and change to get started on the objective. We got a new objective finally. We're finally onto a new objective, and to get into the key terms. Don't worry about the do not question just yet. So go ahead and get into that new objective and the new key terms. The only key term on there you might already have is sharecropping. If you already got it, don't worry about it. But I couldn't remember if, I know we talked about it, I can't remember if I made it a key term or not. So if I didn't, it's
the key term.
Was sharecropping a key term yesterday?
Yeah. You put it in the slide.
Okay, but so it was on there yesterday already?
Yeah.
So if it was on there yesterday, you can skip it. You don't need it. You don't need it again. We're just gonna talk about it in passing because I know we spent time on it yesterday. So just make sure that you got it in there. Oh yeah, we're gonna talk about literacy tests. I do not have my actual literacy test here since most of you are on Zoom. I'll try to bring one for the people that are here tomorrow, and I'll show it to you guys when I can. But I used to give y'all, like my 8th graders, I used to give them little literacy tests and be like, try to pass it. Because you can see how rigged they are. Like you could probably pass it, but they're rigged. We'll talk about it. Literacy tests are interesting.
What did you do? Did you make everyone turn on their camera?
What are you talking about?
Because my camera turned on immediately when I put on.
Eric, that's just your setting.
No, it's not my setting.
It's your setting.
Come on, man.
I hate turning my
About a minute and a half, guys, and then we're gonna move on. I'm trying to fix something because I noticed in the video the faces were blocking some people, and I can't figure out how to turn them off now in this mode. So give me a second while I work on that. Make sure you have the key terms and everything done and ready to go. If you have any questions, put them in chats, and we will talk about them. No, why? What's he? Oh God, Zach. Zach, why? Is that Teddy Roosevelt?
Oh, is that you? Oh.
That's awesome.
What happened to the top of your mic?
Well, I don't know what happened to the top of my head, but whatever happened to it also happened to Teddy's. So I did notice. That's awesome though. That photoshopping. His mustache. That's funny. All right, guys. We've been at a minute and a half. I don't know if it's any of you guys in here, but if any of you do happen to watch the videos and catch up that way or review notes that way, let me know if the little pictures are in the way, and I'll probably have to refrain from doing this way, or I'll have to look up how to fix it because I don't think I can figure out how to close them right now. So let's go ahead and get started. How did I get a picture of Roosevelt? It's a very long story. No, yeah, I wish. That's one of the ones I need. I don't know how I got that picture. You'll have to ask Zach. Zach's the one that found it. He probably used magic on the internet or something. Internet magic. All right. So let's go ahead and move forward. All right. So we're talking about the failures of Reconstruction. And specifically, we're talking about the lasting effects of them. We're going to talk the things. So most of the stuff we talked about yesterday was self-contained, right? It's happening during Reconstruction. Most of the things we're going to talk about here will keep happening after Reconstruction is over. We're going to talk about how Reconstruction ends, when the period ends, and then we're going to get into the stuff that keeps happening. So let's go ahead and move forward. First, I told you guys I would find this info for you yesterday, and I did. You don't need to write it down necessarily. The one thing you might want to put is one of the legacies of Reconstruction is that when the period of Reconstruction ends, it is much, much much harder for African Americans to be elected to public office. During Reconstruction, when I showed you the slide yesterday, there was a bunch, right? A bunch of state legislators, a bunch of senators, a bunch of congressmen, one governor. That governor was PBS Pinchback. That was his name. And he served from 72 to 73, 1872 to 1870. He served for a year. He was elected in 72 and he served throughout that year. He's governor of Louisiana. When Pinchback steps down or when Pinchback is replaced with the next guy, there will not be another African American governor elected till 1990. 1990. So 120 years almost, just under that. All right, and that guy will be elected in 89. I didn't get his name because it's not relevant to this, right? So again, you don't need to write this slide down, but you might want to add that it was harder for African Americans to keep public office, right? When the period ended, it's harder for them to keep office. You don't need his name. They're not going to ask you. You'll just, there was a governor elected during Reconstruction. There wasn't another one until 1990, right? That's not even like, hey, once the Civil Rights Movement, and that's way after. That's, again, 100 and some years of no African American governors in those states.
Guy in the picture is black?
Yes. Yeah. So that was just, again, info from yesterday. You didn't really need to, you just need the idea of it, the concept that during Reconstruction, there was a lot of representation. And once Reconstruction ends, it goes away for a long time. So I'm going to move forward from here so we can get into the actual key point today. So our first key point, Southern plantation owners continue to own the majority of the region's lands after Reconstruction. So there were all these talks, right? Like Sherman had a plan for redistributing land, so did Lincoln, so did a bunch of these people. Grant wanted to do that. A lot of radical Republicans in Congress wanted to do it. But at the end of the day, most of the plantation owners who owned the land before the war kept the land. Former slaves wanted to get land, wanted to own their own land, but generally fell short of self-sufficiency. What does that mean? What do I mean when I say they fell short of self-sufficiency? You can type it in the chat. You can come off mute and say it. If you're in the room, you can give me an answer. What does that mean? When they wanted to own land, but they fell short. They couldn't get there. They weren't self-sufficient. What does that mean?
They didn't have money.
They didn't have money. That's a good one. What else? What else? In chat, you can unmute or you can type it in. What else? They don't have money. What else don't they have? What else do you think they would need if they want to like own land and be profitable, farmers or crop
They need, like, seeds.
seeds? What else? Tools, yeah, tools is good. Money, tools, seeds. Guys, I want you to think of the simplest things. These are people that used to be
They need
slaves.
slaves, right?
No, they don't need slaves. Huh? Well, food, supplies, be white, no, not quite be white, practically though. Transportation, so basically, I mean everything. From the clothes on their back to the tools you need to farm, the seeds you need to farm, the supplies, the tools, the vehicles, right? The house, the land. Having the money to buy the land's like the simplest thing, right? Be able to read and write, that's super true. That's another good point to make, right? Literacy is another challenge. A lot of former slaves weren't allowed to learn to do that. The Freedmen's Bureau tried to fix some of that, but they can't fix all of it. And so all of these factors and more contribute to former slaves just not being able to do the things they need to get land ownership. They want to own land. And guys like Sherman had wanted to just give them land. But throughout the process, one of the big failures is they're not able to get any. And more than literally being land, being a landowner during this time gave you what? What is it? Not just power is good, but what is it equal to? You get power, you get status, you get what else? Money, right? That's how you make money. If you want to make money, you have to have the land to do it, especially if you're going to live in the South. And so these people weren't able to get that. These freedmen, and not just the freedmen, I mind you, poor whites are in the same boat kind of, aren't able to get that. And there's a system in place that does that, right? There's a system in place that prevents this from happening. So I'm going to go ahead and move forward because I've been on here a little bit. Do we need more time? I don't think we do. So I'm going to move forward. Sharecropping. Why did freedmen have trouble owning land? Because as former slaves, they had little to help. These are actual photographs, and I'm blocking one of them. Let me see if I can get out of the way there, of sharecroppers. And this would be right after the Civil War. This would be 1850s, 1860s. They're living in cloth tents, canvas tents. This, if I'm not mistaken, is like a heater and a stove all in one that you'd have to keep in the tent to, be able to feed yourself. This is all stuff that they have to get through the system of sharecropping, right? It's an exploitive soil intensive system. It limits blacks, it limits poor whites, it limits their access to land. How does it work? So in the chat, or come off mute and type it, and just put it out there. What are the parts of sharecropping? How do they work?
You buy the land and the property is 2%, but you also have to buy the clothing, the tools, and everything else, which then puts you in a little debt, and then you of course try to pay off the debt, but it's just a continuous cycle of being in debt.
Perfect, right? So someone in class said it, right? Wow, perfect timing. In sharecropping, the sharecropper, as they're called, has to borrow land. They don't own the land, right? But they have to make a deal to be able to work on the land. But they don't have any money, right? A lot of them are freedmen, former slaves. They don't have money, they don't have clothes, they don't have tools, they don't have tables, homes, anything. So they have to get all that stuff from the landowner. The landowner has plenty of that stuff. And the way they get it is on credit, right? They borrow it. And borrowing it means they owe debt. And they get in so much debt that they're not able to pay it back, right? This is all stuff we talked about. I know we're just reviewing it. So what do you call this thing, this ring, this loop? Somebody in chat tell me, because chat's been mighty silent. I got people in class answering for you. What is this called? What would you refer to it as? It's a what? What is it? You can say it privately, you can say it publicly in chat, but what is it? It's a what? Circle of hell. Pretty much, right? A circle of hell / debt, right? It's a debt circle. It's a cycle, and it doesn't end. And something important that if you didn't note it yesterday, note it right now. I'm telling you, it's rigged, right? It's rigged. It's not a fair system. In theory, you should be able to buy your way out of it, but the whole system's rigged to prevent you from buying your way out of it. And it affected freedmen a lot, but it affected everybody that was poor. It affected poor whites too. Right? You tend to not feel as bad for them because obviously they weren't in as bad a situation as a lot of these freedmen were. But it affects everybody. And these landowners, these planters, right? That planter class is going to keep doing that, keep doing that, keep doing that. So this was a review slide. So I'm going to move forward. But again, if you didn't talk about it being rigged, if you didn't talk about it being a cycle and a circle, make sure you write that in there with your sharecropping definition because it's super, super, super important. Yeah. No. Sorry, I do not. So now here's what we're going to do. This one's important. And this one, I need you to do it in the chat box privately. I'm going to give you 2 minutes on the clock. And I'm actually going to probably have to turn my camera off so you can see the title for the third image. I want you to look at these images. These are all from the same artist in the same newspaper, 65, 68, and 74, throughout different periods in Reconstruction. In the chat box privately, tell me what's changing. What do you think is changing? There's no right or wrong answer. What do you think is changing? Tell me privately in the chat box. What do you think is changing? Yeah, like type it. And I just want to know what you think, because there could be a bunch of reasons. So far, I'm seeing some that I like. We'll talk about it after. Like, I'm not kidding. Like, there's a bunch of things you could pick. Alex, that could be it too. Look at the interpretation though. Look at, again, same artist, same newspaper. Look at the interpretation of freedmen in there. Roman, I think you're right on the money. At least that's a good part of it. Max, that's also solid. Z, I would need you to elaborate a little bit more. Jay, look closely at the last picture. Make sure that that's what you're seeing. Yeah, that's good. So I'll give you, you got another minute or so, try to get that response in. What do you think? What's the change? What's happening? And then I'll kind of talk about each one and tell you what I see in them. So about another minute and change on there. But really look at them carefully because I can't stress enough. It's the same artist. And in fact, we've looked at this artist was the guy that did your exit ticket picture yesterday. It's the same artist. It's the same newspaper. So it's not like they're different people. It's the same person, but his perspective is changing. Why? I mean, I don't know. That's pretty good. That's solid. So about another 35 seconds. So remember, get that to me in chat. What do you think? What's going on here? Try to get me that response. Good point, Shane. That's pretty solid. So, all right, guys, really quickly, what I see when I look at this picture, it almost doesn't look like it's the same artist, right? Because you got one that's happening in 65, technically during Johnson's Reconstruction era, right? When Reconstruction is being really weak and Confederates are still running the South. When you have things like black codes, when you have things like people being beaten and scared and not being able to vote. And Thomas Nass, he's very sympathetic, right? He seems like he's very sympathetic towards freedmen and towards their cause. And then you have here right at the start of military Reconstruction, he also still kind of seems sympathetic towards their cause, right? That you see the guy being trampled on, like, is this what the government looks like? But fast forward a couple of years, a few years of African Americans being in Congress and being represented and being, getting their equal treatment under military Reconstruction. And you have this portrayal of Congress, which very much changed, right? This isn't a very flattering portrayal of African Americans in Congress. And we're not here to actually break these down quite yet, but I'm just showing you the difference. A lot of you said, well, it shows a change in opinion, right? It shows, hey, when the Confederates are in charge, they're harsh. And you see the shift of, well, maybe equality, like the guy may be thinking, maybe I don't like equality all that much, right? That's one way to look at it. There are other ways to interpret it. But a big point that I just want to show you is, it seems obvious now, right, that equality is a good thing. But even somebody who knew what was going on during one era of Reconstruction was wrong, they might not necessarily think the way we think. You know what I mean? Like it's a different time, and it's always changing. Right? It's like the Susan B. Anthony quote where she's talking about, like, why are you letting them vote and not us? Like, just keep that in mind. Keep in mind when you look at this stuff, and we're going to get more into what that means, because it's very much like, no, yeah, I'll save that for later. But yes, so good job. I appreciate y'all participating, actually looking at these and looking at them carefully, because again, the first time I looked at these, I started looking at this guy's art, and you see how it changes over the years through Reconstruction. It's crazy. So again, same artist, same newspaper. So election of 1876, moving on. The election was between Rutherford B. Hayes and Samuel Tilden. Hayes is a Republican, Tilden is a Democrat. What you need to know, because you do not need to write every single word on this slide. This was a very close, contentious, and tight election. It was really, really close. In fact, there was disputed results in Louisiana, South Carolina, and Florida. The Congress had to make an electoral commission of members to help support the cause. I just realized my camera's still off. Sorry about that. There we go. So had to help the cause. They had to make a group. So the Senate chose 3 Republicans, 2 Democrats. The House chose 3 Democrats, 2 Republicans. The Supreme Court chose 2 Democrat-leaning and 2 Republican-leaning. Chief Justice was independent. Basically, they tried to put together a 15-member commission that was even. And the Electoral Commission voted 8-7 in favor of Hayes, and Hayes becomes president. So what do you need to know from this slide? In a very close election that had to be decided by a commission, right, an electoral commission, Hayes wins the vote 8-7 and goes into office. And he has to make a deal to win the presidency. And we're going to talk about the deal on the next slide. But Hayes, the Republican candidate, has to make a deal in order to win the presidency in 76. And he, yeah, it was a real close election. Hayes wins, but in order to win, he has to make a deal. And we're going to talk about the deal next, and we'll talk about what it's called and all that stuff. But it's a tight election. Hayes wins, but he's got to make a deal in order to win because he wasn't going to win without it.
These are 19.
Hayes,
After
16, 17,
before
18,
him.
19. Yeah, 19. Because it's Lincoln is 16, Johnson is 17, Grant is 18, 19. So a little bit longer. Give you about another 45 seconds or so. That's a short one. You don't need too much. Don't write in all that info. You don't really need it. I just like to show you what the elections looked like, how the turnout was. And we'll start seeing some of these other states popping in soon. That'll be fun. Teddy Roosevelt. I'm still looking at that picture. It's still funny. Still makes me laugh. I do love Teddy Roosevelt. I only say it like at every chance I get, right? That Teddy Roosevelt's my favorite. All right, guys, let's go to move forward. Now we're going to get into the deal that was made, right? So the Compromise of 1877. Hayes becomes president, but the South had to remove federal troops. Federal troops had to be removed from the South. So no more soldiers enforcing rules in the South. And Hayes, right? Hayes's government had to help develop infrastructure in the South. And when they say infrastructure, they're specifically talking about railroads and telegraph lines. They had to appoint a Southerner to the cabinet. And in doing this, a result of this is you get limited enforcement of racial equality. So while the Army is in the South, right, the Army's like, hey, the law's the law. You do it. And they're enforcing it. They're making it happen. It's federal law. You're going to follow federal law. We're the Army. But once the troops leave, enforcement of racial equality is very limited because now you're going to have local governments be the ones in charge. And I'm going to show you in a bit that by this time, by 1877, all the local governments are pretty much all Democrat. Southern Democrat, right? Jacksonian Democrat, the Democrats that were Confederates. They've taken over again. So we're going to get into all that stuff in a second. So, but just, you got to know, Compromise of 1877, Hayes becomes president, but those things happen. Those three things. An effect, this last one's an effect. I should have made that clear. An effect is it limits the enforcement of racial equality. That will go away. That's why you don't get another African-American governor in Louisiana for 100 years. Because there's no more enforcement of those federal laws. They fall back to the states. The KKK will rise to power again in this post-Reconstruction era.
Yeah. Oh, no.
Say, I have a mark here to throw at you.
No.
Come on, man. This is when they will rise to like the peak of their power. When you think of KKK riding around in horses, doing whatever they want, driving around in cars, that's after this period. Because the military's gone and there's that vacuum. There's no one there to stop them. And the more power they get, right, the more corrupt it gets. You think of like the local sheriff is a member of the Klan and all that stuff. That comes after the military leaves. And the military leaves because of this deal. Yeah, that's not a bad way to look at it. But and again, part of why this is happening, I can't stress enough, the North's resolve in this, like the North caring about this stuff, is just going down. They don't care as much. In fact, some of them see the equality and they're not the biggest fans of it either. Not to say that they are all against it, because that's not true. But again, it's 1875, 1876. I can't stress enough that some of these Northerners just saw equality and maybe didn't like it. I say maybe. I don't want to give, I'm not trying to paint this big racist brush, but it could happen. And in a sense, it kind of did, because that lack of resolve means that, oh, we'll get the presidency, we just got to get all the troops out. That's fine. It's not like the troops are keeping the peace. You know what I mean? Like it goes away. It fades over time, and it wasn't in place long enough to make it permanent. And we're going to get into some of the reasons why it's never able to, it doesn't come back. And a lot of it's violence, and a lot of it is just systems that are put in place that are a little rigged. So again, another 30 so seconds. I've been on this slide a while, and we'll move forward. Children are blood. Yeah, this was very much a thread. This is the portrayal of that deal, right? We'll get into it with voting and what happens, voter suppression and all that horrible, horrible stuff that will take place. All right, let's move forward. So Southern redemption. Before you start writing, the Amnesty Act of 1872 removed voter restrictions for former Confederates, except for high-ranking officers and government officials. So basically, every other Confederate that couldn't vote during military Reconstruction was now able to vote. All of the low to middle Confederates, which is a lot of people. So what does the Amnesty Act do? It removes voter restrictions on Confederates, except for the highest of the highest of the highest. So except for the top leadership, every other Confederate's able to vote again. And through that period, you get these people known as redeemers. You could put redeemer Democrats and in quotes put redeemers. That's what they're called. And redeemers, their whole goal is to redeem the South, establish home rule, get back the South, bring back the South, bring back the South. That's their goal. That's why they're called redeemers. They're there to redeem the South. Don't just write, they want to redeem the South. Write what that means. They want to bring the South back to its former glory. Right? That's what they would say. They'd want to bring the South back to its former glory. That's a redeemer. You need to write down redeemer. The dates and the states on the bottom, you don't need to write that. You need redeemers. You need Amnesty Act of 1872. And this one, this chart on the bottom, when you get there, is just so you can see when redeemers took control of the states in the Confederacy again. So remember, Virginia was never lost to Republicans, but Tennessee was, or I'm sorry, not Virginia. At one point, all of these states were Republican states. I don't know what I was doing there. But you see early on, certain states start to get Democrat control again. Democrats start to take control, right? Confederates start to vote in their own people again. It happens in 1869 in Tennessee. In 1870, Virginia and North Carolina. In 71, Georgia. Then in 73, Texas. 74, Alabama and Arkansas. In 76, it was Mississippi. And then in 77, you get Florida, Louisiana, and South Carolina. And by 77, all of these states have gone back to being what they were before the Civil War. Those people with that mindset are in the leadership. Former Confederates are voting and acting like normal citizens again. And by 77, the law and order that was put in place by the military during military Reconstruction is gone because the military has left due to the Compromise of 1877. So by 1877, what you would have called the Reconstruction era is over. It is technically over. And in the South specifically, this is the start of a different era that we know as the Jim Crow era. The Jim Crow era lasts almost 100 years, lasts like 90 years. And we'll get into that in a little bit. So again, a quick minute. You don't need too much time on here. It's just the Amnesty Act and the Redeemers, what the Redeemers are. Those are some key terms. And basically, you can almost, with a blanket term, say any Southerner that's running for office during this time, this late Reconstruction era time, is running on a Redeemer platform. The whole thing is bring back the South. Yeah, like that's their whole goal. That's their whole platform. So about 30, 40 seconds left, and we'll move forward. We're about to get into the last key points and a few other things from there. And we will be done with notes. All right, let's go to move forward. You don't need to write anything here other than the lost cause, the title, and what it was. And what it was, in a nutshell, the lost cause, in quotes, is this, how do I put it? It's a defense of what the Confederacy stood for, right? So this is where you get the term the war against Northern aggression, right? They're trying to kind of wipe away why the Civil War started and make it something else, right? Like the North didn't start the Civil War. You know that's not true. That's not what happened, right? The South literally started seceding when Lincoln was elected. The South are the ones that attacked Fort Sumter. The South started that war. But that term, War of Northern Aggression, comes out of this. A defense of states' rights as the cause of secession, not slavery, even though the reason it happened was because an abolitionist was elected president. Secession was justified due to political and cultural and economic aggression from the North. Basically, what you get, the lost cause, what the lost cause is in writing, a defense of the Confederacy. It's a defense of the Confederacy, and they're trying to change why the war started, right? And I always say it, and it's true, and I stole it from the internet, but the Civil War is about a state's right to have slaves. It's not about states' rights. If it was about states' rights, it would have happened in 1832. That's not what it's about. It's about slavery. And this whole thing, this lost cause, this book, this writing, is where that myth comes from. And it is a myth, right? You can make the argument that it's not. You're just wrong. That's not what the facts say. We know why it happened. And that's what this is. And you might just know the name, right? Know the name, the lost cause. When you hear that, if you hear that reference to as like a literary piece, they're talking about like forgiving the Confederacy. It's defending the Confederacy. That's all you need. You don't need the rest of this. This is a quote from it. That's an image of it. The Daughters of the Confederacy, don't worry about that so much. So just know that. That's where the myth comes from. If you're wondering where that comes from, that's where it comes from. It's this thing. It had a name. So what was it again? It's a defense of the Confederacy. And it's an attempt to change the reasons for the, to change why the Civil War happened, like the reasons for it happened. Yeah, we're going to get into some of the bad stuff that happens after Reconstruction ends. We'll get into it a little bit, and just know that what we're talking about is happening for basically almost 100, like it's happening for around 90 years. So from 77 till the Civil Rights Movement again, and obviously well after that starts, this Jim Crow stuff is happening. There's little victories here and there, and we'll get into the ones we're talking about as we move forward in class. But this, like the blanket stuff we're going to talk about, the big terms, it's happening. It's going on. All right, I'll tell you a story in a little bit about like my grandmother seeing it with her own eyes. She tells me stories about it all the time. She has pictures of it, like old black and white photos of it. It's real. It's a real thing. So let's go to move forward. Last key point: segregation, violence, and Supreme Court decisions and local political tactics will progressively strip away African Americans' rights. But the 14th and 15th Amendments will eventually become the basis for court decisions upholding civil rights in the 20th century. So basically, what is this saying, right? Well, post-Reconstruction, through various means, former Confederates, I get reluctant to call them Democrats and Republicans because they're so different now. But former Confederates, Democrats at the time, strategically and intentionally take away the rights of African Americans and other minorities and other poor people for that matter, right? But eventually, through things like the Civil Rights Movement, through the acts of people like Dr. King, Jose Angel Gutierrez, or Malcolm X, people like that, these civil rights movements that you know about that we will talk about, the 14th and 15th Amendment will be the basis for court decisions moving forward. Cesar Chavez is another one that I should have mentioned. But you get all these different civil rights movements later on, and by the time you hit the 20th century, at the 1900s, eventually court decisions will be based on that. It would be a shame, right? So I'll give you a quick minute and a half for that, and then we'll move forward.
Have you posted the exit ticket yet?
It's an AP classroom. I haven't posted it yet,
Isn't it begun?
but it's not up yet. And I wouldn't take it yet because you need some of the stuff we're going to talk about. Some of the stuff we're going to talk about is in there.
No, just get ready.
Yeah, but don't start it because it's 10 minutes. You'll have time to do it in class, but don't start it yet. So the AP classroom will post in a little bit, guys. Don't start it early because it's timed. So if you started early and you bomb it because you ran out of time because you're still here in class, I'm not going to let you take it again. Don't start it yet. You'll have time at the end, I promise. There's only 3 slides left. All right. It's about 30 more seconds. All right, let's go to move forward. Jim Crow. So, what is Jim Crow? Well, Jim Crow is 2 things, right? It's an era, but we call the era the Jim Crow era because it's based around Jim Crow laws. And Jim Crow laws are basically, and you don't have to write them this way if you don't want to, but I would. So it's easier to remember at this, right? They're racist laws. They're very intentional. They're very deliberate. It's not an accident that they are unfair to certain groups of people. They do this on purpose. And they're like black codes, but they're not as extreme. Black codes were literally slave laws. Jim Crow laws are designed by people so that way they pretend to not take away rights. It's an attempt to restrict freedoms like the 14th and 15th Amendment or the Civil Rights Act of 1866. Many of these laws were not overturned until the 1960s, and the effects of Jim Crow can still be felt today. And what I mean by that is from things like availability of land, the way neighborhoods are drawn out, the way school zones are drawn out, a lot of that stuff is still affected by Jim Crow laws, and specifically like segregation and things like that. So I'll give you a quick minute and a half. All you need to know is what they are. What they are, they're laws. That first bullet point is the main thing you need, right? We'll talk about when they get overturned. We'll talk about all that stuff. But this is very much a real part of America. This is American history. I mean, some of your grandparents maybe or great-grandparents. I know my grandmother specifically has a lot of stories about seeing signs that say no Mexicans on the wall. Driving around and seeing that. She always used to tell me a story about so I always tell people, right, like everybody likes tacos. I don't know, I have yet to meet a person that genuinely doesn't like tacos. When she was a kid though, they had to hide them. They couldn't eat them at school because the other kids would laugh at them and like bully them and threaten to beat them up and stuff, like her and her siblings, because they're eating tacos and not sandwiches. I'm not kidding, that's a thing. And stuff like that used to happen, right? And I use the Hispanic angle because that's what I am and that's what I know. And I tell you that story to tell you that this stuff is real. And it didn't not happen. And it is very much wrong. And it takes a lot of brave people to change it. And it will change over time. And we will get into the changes. But it's a thing. And it affects a lot of people. I talk to some of your elders and they might have stories about my grandmother, will always roll her eyes if she's watching like Good Morning America and Gwyneth Paltrow is making tacos. She just rolls her eyes. Like it annoys her a little bit, like just a little bit, right? Because of how she grew up, because of what she saw every day. She's fine with it, but like she's also a person that is uncomfortable if she's in a restaurant and she sees we're the only Hispanics. She gets uncomfortable, and she has no reason to be uncomfortable, right? Everybody's really awesome and really nice, but it's something she grew up with. So it's what it's true. Diego, you make that joke, but it's true, and they would do that. And so that's why she will always kind of roll her eye when she sees, not Hispanic people like enjoying. She always tells me, and she says it in Spanish, right? Like she always says like the black people are really nice to us and other Hispanics. And she also says, I'm forgetting who else, Asian people, we're always really nice to them. But like she always is nervous around white people. And I don't like to make it about color and about, because that's not what it is anymore, right? But during a certain time period, for certain people, it was. And She could be in a restaurant that's really good, right? And like it was in Bastrop. I remember because we were going to College Station, and we're eating. It was like a burger shack, and it was we're the only Hispanics there at the table we're sitting at, and she's just uncomfortable. She's just not comfortable. If she sees other Hispanic people, she's okay, right? Or other not whites, but she gets nervous. She's just a little bit nervous. What if something happens? Nothing's gonna happen. It's 2020. But what if something happens? So no, but it's true. Like nothing's gonna happen. Like I don't know any people that are like that today. Maybe, right? And again, like, is there people that are like that or think that? Probably, maybe somewhere. In fact, I guarantee there are. But the vast majority of people you meet are not like that, right? I don't know anybody that's genuinely like that. I'm sure you guys would have to struggle to find someone that's actually like that. Are y'all still talking about sandwiches in there? All right, guys. So that was the time we're going to move on from Jim Crow. That was my Jim Crow story. We'll talk about segregation. Segregation, despite the protections of the 14th Amendment, is deemed legal by the landmark case Plessy versus Ferguson, which was in 1896. Segregation was legal as long as facilities were separate but equal. You need that quote. You need the name of the Supreme Court case. What's here are three different definitions for the same thing. What is segregation? It is splitting up facilities, right? There's a black water fountain and a white water fountain. You need the name of the court case and the date, and you need to know that the case made it legal as long as they were separate but equal. And to point out the hypocrisy of the whole segregation thing, in practice, facilities were never equal. They were always separate, but they were very rarely, and I would argue never equal.
What kind of toilet is that?
It's a water fountain. It's a water fountain.
Oh, I thought it was a
No, it's a water pump. It's a water pump. Guys, y'all still talking about tuna and mayo? What's wrong with y'all? So focus up. So segregation, Supreme Court case name. What did it do? It coined the term separate but equal. Oh, you can separate them by race as long as it's equal, and it's never equal in practice. Ew, Isaac, no. Isaac, why? Do you really? Isaac, is that? Isaac, that can't be good. He did it? Okay, Donovan's lying to me.
I smell cat from this man all the way from here.
It's a fib. I hope not. That doesn't sound very appetizing. That's all. It just doesn't sound good. Like I like tasty food as much as the next person, but that doesn't sound good. I love mustard though. I can eat mustard all day.
I mean, yellow mayo.
Yellow
Dang.
mayo with beans. Ew, now y'all are just being nasty on purpose. Mayo with beans.
Like, we were in an Xbox party and he goes, hold on, I'm gonna get a snack.
See, but Robert, I'll eat that. That sounds fine. I mean, I'm not a big fan of mayo. I'd rather just have mustard, like double the mustard. But they were eating sandwiches. So in her story, like they would have like sandwiches on white bread, or just on regular bread or whatever, and that's what they were mocking that that her family didn't have sandwiches. Right? They had like a tortilla with beans in it because they were poor Hispanics. Again, guys, racism doesn't make sense. If it made sense, it would be, you know what I mean? Like. If it made sense, maybe people would do it. I don't know, but it was never about. It's not about the food, right? It's about the difference of cultures. But sour cream's not the same as mayo. In fact, that's not. They're not the same thing.
Did they have Thousand Island back then?
I don't think they did. Maybe not bottled. I don't know. You'd have to look up when it was made. All right, guys, we're going to move forward because we need more time on this slide because we've been talking a lot about sandwiches. White taco does sound really good, actually.
You have extra food?
I don't. I'm going to go to move forward, guys. If you needed the time, it is on there, but I want to make sure you have time for the exit ticket. So the last slide is right here. Disenfranchisement. What? Oh, it's on Google Classroom.
Oh, yeah.
Disenfranchisement. What is disenfranchisement? It's taking away someone's right to vote. When violence failed to suppress voting, many Southerners, and when I say Southerners, I'm specifically talking about that specific type of Southerner, right? Those former Confederates, those Jacksonian Democrat types, tried to do more covert things. One of the things they did was a poll tax. Why a poll tax? Well, poor people can't vote because poor people tend to vote for the other guys, and we don't want the other guys in office. So we'll charge you to vote. So that's one. The others were literacy tests. Now, they're disguised as something good, right? Hey, all you got to do is be able to read. You can vote. Literacy. That's it. That's a fair ask, at least in theory. But they're rigged. And they're rigged to prevent specific groups of people who disagree with them to not vote. So it would be like if I said, hey, guys, before you get into class today, I don't know, I'm giving you a literacy test. You think, well, I can read. That's fine. I want to pass class. But then I ask you a really difficult question. It's like I asked you a question about, like, tell me what FDR's plan of Lend-Lease was.
Who?
Exactly. Some of you might know that. You'll know it soon, but some of you might not, right? And maybe I'm picking really, really good history students, right? And so I ask you about Lend-Lease when a bunch of you probably don't know yet Lend-Lease yet.
Oh, you mean like,
Well, but that's my point. These things are rigged, right? If I ask that question to let you into class, I'm doing it on purpose because I only want people who know the answer, right? Whereas if I said, hey, what was George Washington, right? I make it more an easier thing, right? That's the difference. All right, guys, focus up. So where are we at? There is a minute and a half left. Get that disenfranchisement slide down, then we're getting into the exit ticket. If you're done with your notes, start looking into AP Classroom, and we're going to start talking about this. Don't start it yet, but log into AP Classroom. Okay, well, but here's the, it's only 10 minutes though. It's time.
Right now, 10 minutes.
No, when you click it. So if you're going to do it at home, when you click it, 10 minutes. So everybody on the Zoom, do not leave the Zoom. When you're done with your notes, log into AP Classroom. Huh? You just need to know about poll taxes and literacy tests. And that it's an attempt to disenfranchise specific groups like African Americans, like poor whites, and it's specifically designed to take away their right to vote, their constitutional right to vote.
no.
All right, guys. That is about time. So let's go ahead and move forward. Apparently there's going to be a paintball match later. That'll be fun. I'm going to stop the recording. We're going to get into the